Greetings to all. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is International Day for Tolerance. In this lecture, we shall attempt to explain historical insights and significance of International Day for Tolerance. This lecture shall elaborate on how United Nations Charter, with specific mention of its preamble and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, present important inspirational ideas with respect to International Day for Tolerance. The lecture shall discuss important aspects pointed out in UNESCO's 1995 Declaration of Principles on Tolerance. As we begin the lecture, we all know that United Nations, which is one of the most important international organizations formed in the aftermath of the Second World War. The United Nations has four main purposes, namely, to keep peace throughout the world, to develop friendly relations amongst nations, to help nations work together to improve the lives of poor people, to conquer hunger, diseases and illiteracy, and to encourage respect for each other's rights and freedoms, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions to achieve these goals. In many respects, quoting from this very significant remark by the then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in remarks at the General Assembly debate on the maintenance of international peace and security on 1st October 2015, read from UN.org, that is, quoting the remarks, "In many respects, the world is shifting beneath our feet, yet the Charter remains a firm foundation for shared progress. The Charter of United Nations points towards the need for tolerance with respect to peace, friendly relations, to help nations work together, and above all to ensure that United Nations is a center for harmonizing the actions to achieve goals." Now, when we talk about important days, United Nations designates specific days, weeks, years and decades on occasions to mark particular events or topics in order to promote through awareness and actions the objective of the organization. Now, when we talk about these special occasions wherein United Nations designates specific days, weeks, years, decades, these occasions are celebrations as declared by the specialized agencies of United Nations such as UNESCO, UNICEF, amongst others. And the real aim of creating these special observances is that by creating special observances, the United Nations promotes international awareness and actions on these issues. When we talk about UNESCO, which is a very important United Nations specialized agency, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, abbreviated as UNESCO, it seeks to build peace through international cooperation in education, sciences, the culture. UNESCO's program contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is defined in Agenda 2030, adopted by UN General Assembly in 2015. Now, a very important UNESCO's 1995 Declaration of Principles on Tolerance, which we shall be delving deeper as we try to understand International Day for Tolerance. This declaration points out that what is tolerance? Tolerance is respect, acceptance and appreciation of the rich diversity of our world's cultures, our forms of expression and ways of being human. Once again, we are reading from UNESCO's 1995 Declaration of Principles on Tolerance, that is, tolerance is respect, acceptance and appreciation of the rich diversity of our world's culture, our forms of expression and ways of being human. In 1996, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 15/95. Now, what did this resolution say? It proclaimed 16th November as the day for International Day for Tolerance. The action, reading from the declaration, the action followed the adoption of Declaration of Principles on Tolerance by UNESCO's member states on 16 November 1995. Now, amongst other things, the declaration affirms that tolerance, it is neither indulgence nor indifference. This tolerance recognizes the universal human rights, fundamental freedom of others. Now, people are naturally diverse. Only tolerance can ensure the survival of mixed communities in every part, in every aspect and in every region of the globe. The United Nations, as we all know, is committed to strengthening tolerance by fostering mutual understanding amongst cultures, amongst various people. Now, this imperative also lies at the core of United Nations Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To elaborate further on this, let's revisit the Charter of the United Nations. What is the Charter of the United Nations? The Charter of the United Nations, it is a founding document of UN. It was signed on 26 June 1945 in San Francisco at the conclusion of the United Nations Conference on International Organization, and this comes into force on 24th October 1945. The United Nations can take actions on a variety of issues due to the its unique international character and the powers which are vested in this charter, which is considered an international treaty. The UN Charter is the source of international law and UN member states are bound by it. The UN Charter codifies major principles of international relations also, from sovereign equality of states to prohibition of the use of force in international relations. The United Nations Charter, let's have a look at the preamble. Now, this preamble tells us that how tolerance is very integral to the working, to the bigger mandate of United Nations. Quoting from and reading from the preamble of United Nations Charter, that is, we the peoples of United Nations determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. Now, it is very essential, this very line, that how the aftermath of the First World War and the Second World War presented before humanity and the world big question of survival. So, therefore, the preamble beginning with the ringing declaration, we the peoples of the United Nations. Further reading that, to reaffirm faith in the fundamental human rights, in dignity and worth of human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. And this preamble also tells us that how to achieve these means, that is, and for these ends, that is, what are the means to get these ends? To practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security. Another important document which gives lot of importance to the bigger picture of tolerance with respect to role of United Nations and its specialized agencies in world governance. This document is Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, this is a milestone document, as many say, in the history of human rights. It was drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world. This declaration was proclaimed by United Nations General Assembly in Paris on 10 December 1948, that is the General Assembly Resolution 217A, as a common standard of achievements for all peoples and all nations. Now, reading from this declaration some very important articles which give lot of insight into the big debate that how important is tolerance with respect to world governance. Article 28 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, and we quote, "Everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized." Article 29, further reading from that, of Universal Declaration of Human Rights points out, and we quote, "Everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. In the exercise of his rights and freedoms," once again quoting from the article, "everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for rights and freedoms of others and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order and the general welfare in a democratic society, and that these rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes, the principles of United Nations." So, as we discuss International Day of Tolerance, in 1995, the UNESCO created Declaration of Principles on Tolerance as a way to define and provide awareness of tolerance. We like to point out that UNESCO created an award also to recognize those with great achievements in promoting the spirit of tolerance or non-violence in various fields such as science, culture, the arts. The UNESCO Madanji Singh Prize and the UNESCO International Day of Tolerance further both recognize tolerance as a universal human right. The member states of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, meeting in Paris at the 28th session of the General Conference from 25th November to 16th November 1995. Now, reading from the preamble of this conference, we get some very important insights with respect to International Day for Tolerance. Preamble says, and we quote, "Bearing in mind that the United Nations Charter states, that is, we the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and for these ends to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors." Now, important factors which are there with respect to observance of this day, that is recalling that the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO, which was adopted on 16 November 1945, states that peace, if it is not to fail, must be founded on the intellectual and moral solidarity of mankind. Recalling that Universal Declaration of Human Rights affirms that everyone has right to freedom of thought, conscience, and Article 18, of opinion and expression, Article 19, and that education should promote understanding, tolerance, friendship amongst all nations, racial or religious people, Article 26. Now, let's go in detail with respect to the very important points that were there in the UNESCO 1995 Declaration of Principles on Tolerance. Now, this declaration points out in this very Article 1 that what do we mean by tolerance? Tolerance implies respect, acceptance, appreciation of the rich diversity of our world's culture, our forms of expressions and ways of being human. It points out that tolerance is fostered by knowledge, openness, communication and freedom of thought, conscience and belief. Tolerance is harmony in difference. It is not only a moral duty, but that it is also a political and legal requirement. Tolerance, the virtue that makes peace possible, contribute to the replacement of the culture of war by a culture of peace. Tolerance is not concession, condescension or indulgence. Tolerance is above all an active attitude prompted by the recognition of universal human rights and fundamental freedom of others. Further, the declaration points out, and we quote, "In no circumstance can it be used to justify infringement of these fundamental values. Tolerance is to be exercised by individuals, groups and states." The declaration further points out, and once again this is available at unesco.org, that is, tolerance is the responsibility that upholds human rights, pluralism, including cultural pluralism, democracy and the rule of law. Tolerance involves rejection of dogmatism and absolutism and affirms the standards set out in international human rights instrument. Further, the declaration says, and we quote, that consistent with respect for human rights, the practice of tolerance does not mean toleration of social injustice or abandonment or weakening of one's convictions. It means that one is free to adhere to one's own convictions and accept that others adhere to theirs. It means that accepting the fact, as the declaration points out, that human beings, naturally diverse in their appearances, situation, speech, behavior and values, have the right to live in peace and to be as they are. It also means that one's views are not to be imposed on others. Now, what could be the ways to nurture tolerance? Article 4 of this declaration guides us, that is education. Education is the most effective means of preventing intolerance. The first step in tolerance education is to teach people what their shared rights and freedoms are, so that they may be respected, and to promote the will to protect those of others. Education for tolerance should be considered an urgent imperative. That is why it is necessary to promote systematic and rational tolerance, as Article 4.2 of the Declaration points out, systematic and rational tolerance teaching methods that will address the cultural, social, economic, political sources of intolerance, which are often the major roots of violence and exclusion. Education policies and programs should contribute to development of understanding, solidarity and tolerance amongst individuals, as well as amongst ethnic, social, cultural, linguistic groups and nations. Education for tolerance, once again, as Article 4.2, Article 4.3 of the Declaration points out, and we quote, "Education for tolerance should aim at countering influences that lead to fear, exclusion of others, and should help young people to develop capacities for independent judgment, critical thinking and ethical reasoning." Article 5 of this declaration points out that commitment to action, which is very essential. That is, we commit ourselves to promoting tolerance and non-violence through programs and institutions in the fields of education, science, culture and communication. Article 6 tells us that International Day for Tolerance, that is, in order to generate public awareness, emphasize the dangers of intolerance and react with renewed commitment and action in support of tolerance promotion and education, we solemnly proclaim 16th November the annual International Day for Tolerance. So, dear learners, International Day for Tolerance, which has a very important message with respect to humanity, that is, we have to understand that tolerance is respect, appreciation of the rich diversity. International Day for Tolerance, as right from 1995, when UNESCO created the Declaration of Principles on Tolerance as a way to define and provide awareness of tolerance, has indeed come a long way. And this is why every year on 16th November, in consonance with the principles of the UN Charter, with the bigger message of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in order to bolster, support and further propagate United Nations efforts of fostering mutual understanding among cultures and people to ensure world peace, International Day for Tolerance indeed has a very significant aspect. International Day for Tolerance, it is indeed getting its reflection and light from United Nations Charter, the Preamble, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and all the important aspects pointed out in UNESCO's 1995 Declaration of Principles on Tolerance are indeed very essential with respect to the main aims of UN to ensure peace, to develop friendly relations amongst nations, to help nations work together, and above all ensure that United Nations and its specialized agencies are playing an important role in terms of harmonizing the actions of nations to achieve these goals. We hope that the lecture presented to you significant inputs and insights. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.